The wrestling world came together to say their final goodbye to the legendary Hulk Hogan. In this exclusive coverage, witness the emotional moments as celebrities, family members, and WWE legends arrived at the memorial service. Under the soft, golden light of a Florida morning, the gates to Hulk Hogan's sprawling Clearwater estate swung open for the final time, not for another championship celebration, not for a reality TV taping, but for a farewell that no fan, friend, or family member had ever truly been ready for. The wrestling world, the entertainment industry, and even icons from beyond the squared circle gathered on this day to say goodbye to the man whose name had become synonymous with larger-than-life charisma, neon bandanas, and the immortal rallying cry, "What you gonna do, brother?" But as limousines and tinted SUVs rolled slowly down the palm-lined driveway, there were no booming voices or pyrotechnic displays. Only the hushed murmurs of grief, the sound of footsteps on marble, and the faint strum of an acoustic guitar playing Real American in the background. Inside the mansion's courtyard, transformed into a private memorial space, rows of white chairs faced a simple stage draped in red and yellow, Hogan's signature colors. At the center stood an open casket framed by towering arrangements of sunflowers, white lilies, and roses dyed gold. Above it, a massive screen played a loop of Hogan's most iconic moments, slamming Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, pointing to the heavens before delivering his leg drop, hugging Make-A-Wish kids backstage. Each clip drew quiet smiles through tears from the crowd, a bittersweet reminder of the energy he brought to millions. The first to arrive were family. His children, Brooke and Nick Hogan, walked hand in hand, their faces pale, eyes red from nights without sleep. Brooke, wearing a black dress with a single gold bracelet, her father's, paused at the casket and whispered something only he would ever hear. Nick, silent but trembling, placed a folded bandana inside, the same red one Hogan had worn during their last family barbecue just months earlier. Close behind came Jennifer McDaniel, Hogan's ex-wife, escorted by a family friend. Despite their history, the grief etched on her face was unmistakable, because no matter the ups and downs, Hogan had been a cornerstone in her life. Then came the wrestling royalty. Triple H, dressed in a dark suit but still carrying the commanding presence of a man used to arenas of 80,000, approached the casket slowly. His head bowed, he placed a replica of the WWE Championship belt across the edge, the nameplate reading Hulk Hogan, gleaming under the morning sun. Behind him, Ric Flair, his longtime friend and occasional rival, walked with a cane, his trademark sunglasses unable to hide the tears streaming down his face. Flair stopped, gripped the edge of the casket with trembling hands, and whispered, "You made me better, brother. You made us all better." He lingered there, shoulders shaking, before stepping aside for the next mourner. The line of celebrities stretched far beyond the wrestling world. Sylvester Stallone, in a tailored black suit, stood still for several moments at the foot of the casket, his jaw set in that familiar determined expression, but his eyes glistening. When he finally stepped forward, he rested his hand gently on Hogan's arm. "We fought different fights," he murmured, "but you were a champion every day." Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson followed soon after, his massive frame somehow looking smaller in the weight of the moment. Removing his sunglasses, he stood before Hogan in silence before speaking softly, "You paved the way for me, for all of us. I'll keep running that road, brother." The memorial wasn't just a star-studded goodbye. It was a gathering of generations whose lives Hogan had touched. Actors, musicians, athletes, and wrestlers young and old filled the seats. John Cena arrived quietly, shaking hands with Hogan's family before taking his place near the front. Roman Reigns, still recovering from his own recent health battle, wore a lei of white flowers, a Polynesian tribute to fallen warriors, and placed it gently over the casket. He closed his eyes for a moment, perhaps picturing the countless times Hogan had offered him words of encouragement backstage. As guests settled, the ceremony began with a live performance of Real American, stripped down to just voice and guitar, turning an arena anthem into a tender hymn. The air was thick with emotion, Even the Florida breeze seemed to pause in respect. The first eulogy came from Vince McMahon, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Terry Bollea wasn't just Hulk Hogan, he began, using Hogan's real name. He was a man who carried the weight of an entire industry on his shoulders and never let it crush him. He turned wrestling into a global phenomenon, and he did it by connecting with people, not as a character, but as a human being. After Vince, Brooke Hogan stepped up to the podium, clutching a piece of paper that shook in her hands. "I used to think my dad belonged to the world," she said, her voice breaking. "I saw the way fans lit up when they met him, how little kids would believe anything was possible because he told them so. But I also knew the man who made us pancakes every Sunday, who sang off-key in the car, who called me his little girl even when I was grown. That's the man I'll miss most." The room filled with muffled sobs. Even the most stoic faces couldn't remain unmoved. One by one, speakers took the stage. Ric Flair told stories of their days traveling together, pranks on the road, locker room laughs, heated matches that ended with hugs. Stallone recounted filming Rocky III with Hogan, remembering how Hogan's larger-than-life presence threatened to steal every scene, yet off-camera he was humble and generous. The Rock, his voice deep and steady, spoke of the first time he met Hogan as a young wrestler. "He looked me in the eye and said, 'Kid, you're gonna be bigger than me.' I didn't believe him then, but I carry that belief with me every day." In the back row, Kevin Nash sat with Scott Hall's widow, their hands clasped in silent solidarity. Shawn Michaels leaned forward, head bowed, praying quietly. Even younger stars like Seth Rollins, Becky Lynch, and Bianca Belair were in attendance, representing the new era that Hogan had made possible. Each mourner seemed to carry their own private reel of memories, matches watched, advice given, kindness shown when no cameras were around. As the ceremony moved forward, the screen above the stage shifted from wrestling highlights to personal photos. Hogan on the beach with his kids, grilling burgers by the pool, laughing at a backyard birthday party. The crowd chuckled softly at a shot of Hogan in an apron, flipping pancakes while wearing his championship belt. Those who had only known the icon were seeing the man, and it deepened the sense of loss. The atmosphere inside the courtyard was one of reverence, but also of shared connection. People who had once been rivals, even enemies, in the public eye embraced without hesitation. Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels, whose real-life feud was the stuff of wrestling legend, stood side by side, united in grief. Undertaker, in a rare appearance out of character, removed his hat and bowed his head for a full minute at the casket before taking a seat. When the final speaker, Hulk Hogan's longtime manager Jimmy Hart, stepped up, the crowd leaned in. Hart's voice wavered as he told the story of Hogan's last days, of how he faced illness with the same determination he had brought to the ring. "He told me, 'Jimmy, I don't want people to be sad when I'm gone. I want them to remember the fun, the smiles, the energy. Tell them I said, thank you for the ride, brother.'" Hart's words hung in the air like a benediction. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of waves from the nearby Gulf Coast and the rustle of palm leaves. Then, in a gesture that felt like something straight out of one of his epic storylines, the guests rose together and gave Hulk Hogan one final standing ovation. The applause was soft at first, then swelled into a thunderous tribute, echoing through the courtyard as if to send the Hulkster off with the energy he had given the world for decades. As the casket was closed and carried toward the hearse, people reached out to touch it one last time. Some with hands, others with roses or folded letters. Outside, fans gathered respectfully behind barriers, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Hulk," and "Forever our champion." The motorcade moved slowly down the drive, sunlight catching the gold trim of the casket as it disappeared beyond the gates. But the real goodbye lingered in the air, in the shared glances between old friends, in the stories whispered as people drifted toward their cars, in the quiet understanding that they had just witnessed the end of an era. For all the fame, the glory, the controversy, and the legend, Hulk Hogan had been, above all else, a man who made people believe in him, in themselves, in the idea that with enough heart, anyone could be a hero. And on this day, in Clearwater, surrounded by love and legacy, the immortal finally rested. After the casket left the courtyard, the crowd inside Hogan's mansion didn't disperse right away. It was as though no one wanted to be the first to step away from the place where so many memories hung in the air. Small clusters of people gathered, their voices hushed, sharing private stories that ranged from tearful to unexpectedly funny. These weren't the tales that made headlines, no championship wins or pay-per-view main events, but the quiet moments that defined Hogan as more than just the immortal. Triple H stood in a corner of the courtyard with John Cena, their heads bowed together in conversation. Triple H spoke softly, recalling the way Hogan had embraced him when he first broke into WWE, telling him that building respect in the locker room was more important than anything else. Cena listened intently, nodding, before offering his own memory, Hogan calling him backstage before Cena's first WrestleMania main event and telling him to make it feel like the biggest thing they've ever seen, because it's the biggest thing you've ever done. Cena smiled sadly. He had a way of making you believe you could carry the world, he said. Nearby, The Rock stood with Roman Reigns, their bond as members of wrestling's extended family evident in their shared grief. Roman adjusted the white lei he had draped over Hogan's casket earlier. When I was coming back from my health break, Roman said quietly, Hulk called me out of the blue. Just to tell me he was proud of me. No cameras, no interviews. Just a brother checking in. The Rock nodded. That's what people don't get, he replied. Behind the larger-than-life character, he was always watching out for the boys, for the business. Sylvester Stallone found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with Vince McMahon, both men uncharacteristically subdued. Stallone, who had been a Hollywood titan in his own right during Hogan's rise, told Vince about the day they filmed Hogan's scenes as Thunder Lips in Rocky III. He picked me up like I was nothing, Stallone said with a faint chuckle, but after the take, he asked if I was okay about 10 times. He had this presence, but he also had this kindness he didn't want anyone to miss. Vince listened, his usual executive demeanor softened. That's the part one hope people remember, Vince said. He was a showman, yes, but his heart was real. In another corner, Ric Flair, still leaning on his cane, was surrounded by Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, and Bret Hart, men whose paths had crossed Hogan's in every conceivable way, as rivals, as allies, as fellow road warriors. Flair, eyes still rimmed with red, recounted one of their final phone calls. He told me he wasn't scared of going, Flair said, his voice breaking. He was scared of leaving people behind without making sure they knew he loved them. That was Hulk, always thinking about the people around him. As the sun dipped slightly, casting a warmer glow over the courtyard, Brooke Hogan re-emerged, no longer at the podium but mingling among the guests. She hugged each person she passed, thanking them for being there. When she reached Dwayne Johnson, they embraced for a long moment. He believed in me, she whispered. Even when I didn't. Johnson squeezed her shoulder. He believed in everyone, he said. That's what made him so rare. The screen above the stage played a new video montage, this one more personal than the wrestling highlight reel. It showed Hogan teaching his kids how to ride bikes, carving a Thanksgiving turkey, dancing badly at a Christmas party. People laughed through their tears, the mood shifting into something warmer. It was a reminder that while the world had lost a legend, his family had lost a father, a friend, a constant source of joy and mischief. After the video ended, Undertaker rose from his seat and slowly made his way to the stage. The room went silent, as it always did when he spoke outside of character. We all have our roles in this business, he began, his deep voice carrying easily. Hulk's role was to make people believe in heroes. And he did that better than anyone. Not just for the fans, but for us in the locker room. He made you want to be better, bigger, stronger, not for your own ego, but for the people who believed in you. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. And now it's our turn to keep that alive. Following Undertaker's words, the guests were invited to share their own brief tributes if they wished. Some came forward, Kevin Nash recalling late-night gym sessions on the road, Bianca Belair talking about Hogan giving her advice on how to handle sudden fame, Chris Jericho sharing how Hogan once called him at 3 a.m. just to tell him he'd nailed a promo on Monday Night Raw. Others stayed in their seats, content to let their memories remain private. In the back, a small table had been set up with a guest book and framed photos of Hogan with fans from across the decades. The book filled quickly with handwritten notes, messages from WWE legends, Hollywood stars, childhood friends, and even neighbors who remembered him not as Hulk Hogan, but as Terry from Clearwater. A separate section was reserved for fans, and though the memorial was private, a few were allowed inside by special invitation. One young man, wearing a faded Hulkamania shirt, wrote in shaky handwriting, "You were my hero growing up. Because of you, I never gave up. Thank you, Hulk." The catering area was quiet, the usual post-service chatter replaced with reflective murmurs. On one table sat a small plate of Hogan's favorite snack, peanut butter and chocolate chip cookies, prepared by a longtime family friend. Some guests took one, smiling faintly at the thought that he would have teased them for getting crumbs on their suits. As the evening approached, the private service moved into a smaller, more intimate reception inside the mansion. The living room had been arranged with couches and armchairs, creating pockets of space for people to sit together and talk. The walls were adorned with memorabilia, title belts, framed magazine covers, and handwritten notes from fellow wrestlers. In one corner, a guitar leaned against a chair, one of the same guitars Hogan had been known to strum during downtime on the road. It was here that some of the most emotional exchanges took place. Roman Reigns, sitting with John Cena and The Rock, admitted, "I didn't realize until today how much he shaped the way we all carry ourselves. Not just in the ring, but in how we treat the people around us." Cena nodded. "That's his real legacy," he said. "It's not just the matches. It's the way he made you feel like you mattered." Sylvester Stallone sat quietly with Brooke and Nick, telling them about the early days of Rocky III. "He wasn't supposed to be in the movie at first," Stallone said. "But once he walked into the room, I knew he was Thunderlips. He didn't just play the part, he lived it. And that's the same way he approached life. He didn't halfway anything." Outside, as twilight settled over Clearwater, a small group gathered by the pool: Triple H, Vince McMahon, Shawn Michaels, and Ric Flair. They spoke in low tones about how the industry had changed, about the years when Hulkamania was not just a gimmick, but a force that kept the company alive. "We were all chasing him," Michaels admitted. "Even if we didn't want to admit it. He set the bar, and he set it high." As the night drew to a close, Brooke Hogan addressed the remaining guests one last time. Her voice was steadier now, though her eyes still shone with tears. "Dad always told me that the measure of a life isn't in what you take with you, it's in what you leave behind." Looking around this room, hearing all these stories, I know he left more than any of us could have imagined. He left love. He left laughter. He left a legacy that will live forever. Outside, the fans were slowly filtering toward the parking areas, but many stopped to leave flowers, photographs, and handwritten letters at the base of the memorial gates. The makeshift shrine grew by the minute, framed magazine covers from the 80s, replica belts with "Thank You, Hulk" scribbled across the gold plates in permanent marker, even a few action figures placed carefully in the grass as if standing guard. A man in his 60s knelt to place an original Hulkamania headband he'd worn to WrestleMania III. "It's yours again, brother," he whispered before stepping away, eyes glistening. Back inside, Vince McMahon had taken a seat in one of the empty front row chairs, staring at the stage. It was rare to see him alone at such an event, but for a few minutes, no one approached him. His mind seemed far away, perhaps replaying the early days of WrestleMania, when Hogan's star power had transformed the WWF into a cultural phenomenon. Finally, Triple H walked over and sat down beside him. "You know," Triple H began, "he made all of this possible. The arenas, the crowds, the global tours. Without him, we'd be a completely different company." Vince gave a slow nod, his voice low. "Without him, we might not have survived at all." In another corner, Hulk's longtime friends from outside the wrestling world gathered around Nick Hogan. Among them was Sylvester Stallone, wearing a simple black blazer and no sunglasses to hide the redness in his eyes. Stallone had known Hulk for decades, ever since casting him as Thunder Lips in Rocky III. "Your dad, he was a fighter in every way," Stallone told Nick, gripping his shoulder firmly. "Not just in the ring. In life. He took hits most people wouldn't get up from, and every time, he stood back up." Nick swallowed hard, nodding, and managed to reply, "That's the part of him I want to keep alive." As the crowd in the main hall began to thin, the family and closest friends were escorted to a smaller, private room for a final, intimate farewell. The room was quieter, lit by warm amber lamps instead of the stark stage lights, and in the center was a smaller table draped in Hogan's red and yellow colors. On it lay his iconic feathered boas, one red and one yellow, carefully folded. Brooke approached first, picking up the red boa and holding it close to her chest. "This still smells like him," she whispered to no one in particular. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. The private gathering soon became a space for unfiltered storytelling. Kevin Nash shared a story about a road trip gone hilariously wrong in the early 90s, where Hogan had managed to get an entire diner of strangers chanting "Brother" before their meals arrived. "He had that thing," Nash said, shaking his head. "That magic. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 100 new friends." Booker T added a more serious memory, the time Hogan had called him after a personal loss, just to talk for hours about nothing in particular. "That's who he was," Booker said. "He didn't just check in. He stayed in." Even in this private setting, the absence of cameras didn't change the raw emotion. Grown men who had spent decades building unshakable personas now sat with heads bowed, eyes wet. The strength they had shown in the public service earlier gave way to open vulnerability. "We're allowed to miss him," Shawn Michaels said quietly, almost as if granting permission to the group. "We're allowed to hurt." Meanwhile, outside the venue, the streets of Clearwater had taken on an almost festival-like appearance despite the grief. Food trucks had set up along the sidewalks, serving the kind of all-American meals Hogan himself loved: burgers, hot dogs, fries. With portions going to charity in his name. Fans swapped stories over meals, showing each other old ticket stubs and grainy photographs from meet and greets decades past. The sound of "Real American" played from a small speaker near the makeshift shrine, and each time the chorus hit, a few people sang along through their tears. Back in the private room, Brooke finally stood to speak to the group. She didn't return to the podium or address the crowd. This was just for them, the inner circle. "When we go back out there," she said, her voice steady now, "I want people to remember that my dad wasn't just Hulk Hogan. He was Terry Bollea. He was the man who made us laugh until our stomachs hurt, who'd drop everything to help a friend, who taught me that life is about more than winning, it's about showing up. And he showed up for all of us." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Undertaker, still standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. He removed his hat, a rare gesture outside the ring, and placed it gently on the table beside the boas. "Rest in peace, my friend," he murmured, and with that, the room seemed to collectively exhale. The private farewell was over, but the legacy it honored was far from gone. As the family prepared to leave, the memorial grounds outside were still alive with quiet tributes. Fans remained, lighting candles, leaving flowers, and sharing hugs with strangers. A young boy in a yellow bandana tugged at his father's sleeve and asked, "Dad, when will Hulk wrestle again?" His father knelt down, pulled him close, and said softly, "In here, buddy. He'll wrestle forever in here," tapping his son's chest. In that moment, it became clear that this final goodbye was not really an ending. Hulk Hogan, the man, the myth, the icon, would live on in the chants, the stories, and the countless lives he had touched, both inside and far beyond the wrestling ring. The memorial service had ended, but the spirit of Hulkamania would never fade. In the days that followed Hulk Hogan's memorial, Clearwater, Florida, seemed to carry a different kind of energy. The streets, still dotted with wilted flowers and faded tribute posters, had become quiet, but not silent. The echoes of the chants from the memorial, Hogan, Hogan, still lingered in the minds of those who had been there. Local businesses left their Hogan memorabilia in place. Restaurants kept photos of him on the walls, gyms hung his classic poses above weight racks, and shop windows displayed his action figures like sacred keepsakes. Even people who had never met him spoke about him as if he were family. In Stamford, Connecticut, the WWE headquarters was draped in black banners adorned with red and yellow trim, a visual representation of mourning and honor. For the first time in years, the company's flagship building played Hogan's entrance music on its outdoor speakers, just loud enough for passers-by to hear. Inside, meetings were held around the clock to coordinate tributes. Triple H, now the chief content officer, insisted that Hogan's next tribute show be unlike anything WWE had ever done, not just another video package before a match, but a night entirely devoted to the man who had transformed professional wrestling into a household phenomenon. Word spread quickly that the upcoming episode of Monday Night Raw would be dedicated to Hogan's legacy. Ticket sales, already strong, suddenly exploded, with fans clamoring to be part of what was being called the final ride of Hulkamania. WWE production teams worked tirelessly, pulling archival footage from decades past, some of it never before seen by the public. There were clips of Hogan backstage joking with crew members, surprising sick children with impromptu visits, and offering quiet encouragement to rookies long before they became stars. Each piece of footage was chosen to show the man behind the character, the one who carried his charisma beyond the bright lights. Back in Florida, the Bolia family kept their lives shielded from the public in the week following the service. Brooke Hogan largely avoided interviews, though she agreed to one brief conversation with a local paper where she described the surreal quiet in her home. "It's strange," she admitted. "You think the hard part is the memorial, but it's the days after that are the hardest. You wake up expecting to hear his voice or see him walk into the room with that big grin, and then you remember." Nick, more reserved than his sister, spent his time organizing his father's memorabilia in the family home: title belts, iconic ring gear, countless photographs. Each item carried a story, and as he placed them carefully into display cases, he found himself whispering those stories aloud, as if telling them to his dad one last time. Wrestlers, past and present, flooded social media with tributes. The Rock posted a lengthy video recalling his first meeting with Hogan. "I was a rookie, and Hulk walked up to me, shook my hand, and said, 'You've got the look, brother, now show them the heart.' That was Hulk. He made you feel like you belonged." Stone Cold Steve Austin shared a rare candid photo of the two backstage, captioning it simply, "Legends never die. Thanks for paving the way, Hulkster." Fans around the world found their own ways to pay homage. In Tokyo, a small wrestling promotion held a special 10-bell salute before their main event, with every wrestler wearing a red bandana in his honor. In London, a mural appeared overnight on the side of a brick building, depicting Hogan in his prime, ripping his shirt open as if ready for one last match. The image was so striking that even non-wrestling fans stopped to take photos. In Mexico City, Lucha Libre fans organized a charity wrestling event with proceeds going to children's hospitals, inspired by Hogan's long history of visiting sick kids. When Monday Night Raw finally aired its tribute episode, the emotion was palpable from the first second. The arena lights dimmed, and the Titantron lit up with the words, "In memory of Hulk Hogan, 1953 to 2025. The opening chords of Real American filled the arena, and thousands of fans stood, holding up signs and chanting his name. WWE superstars lined the stage, some in tears, all wearing commemorative Hulkamania Forever shirts. The first segment was a 15-minute video package. A sweeping journey through Hogan's career, from his AWA days to WrestleMania main events, to his WCW heel turn as Hollywood Hogan, and finally, his Hall of Fame induction. The crowd reacted to each highlight as if reliving it in real time, cheering his victories, booing his NWO betrayal, and roaring during his improbable comeback matches. Throughout the night, matches were punctuated with more tribute segments. Randy Orton shared how Hogan had given him advice early in his career that still guided him. "He told me, kid, your legacy isn't built in one night. It's built in every handshake, every fan picture, every thank you." And he lived that. Becky Lynch spoke about growing up in Ireland and watching Hogan on VHS tapes, how his energy made her believe that wrestling was more than a sport. It was a way to connect with people's hearts. The most emotional moment came near the end of the show, when the lights dimmed again and The Undertaker slowly made his way to the ring. He removed his hat, picked up a microphone, and after a long pause said, "You can't kill Hulkamania. You can't. Because it lives in every single one of us who stepped into that ring and every fan who ever believed. Rest easy, brother." He placed one of Hogan's boas in the center of the ring, draped over a folded championship belt, and walked away without another word. The crowd erupted in a sustained chant of "Thank you, Hogan," that lasted several minutes after the cameras cut to black. Meanwhile, in Clearwater, the family had gathered privately to watch the tribute together. Brooke later revealed that they all sat in silence for most of it, occasionally smiling at old footage, sometimes breaking down at unexpected moments, like seeing Hogan joke with ring crew during commercial breaks. "It wasn't just the big matches that got to me," Brooke said. "It was seeing him in those little moments, just being himself." The following morning, the family received a surprise delivery. Dozens of letters from fans, bundled together with a ribbon, sent by WWE headquarters. Each letter carried a personal story, from people who had met Hogan in person to those who had never seen him outside of a television screen, but felt as though they knew him. One read simply, "You were my childhood. Rest in peace, champ." Another, from a young boy, said, "I never got to see you wrestle, but my dad told me all about you. He says you were the greatest." The week closed with one final gesture. Clearwater City Council announced that the beach where Hogan had often been seen jogging in his later years would be renamed Hogan's Beachfront in his memory. The dedication ceremony was set for the following month, and fans from across the country were already planning to attend. "He always said Clearwater was his home," the mayor said at the announcement. "Now it always will be." The grief was still fresh, but as the days passed, the narrative began to shift from mourning to celebration. Fans didn't just talk about losing Hulk Hogan, they spoke about carrying him forward, about keeping Hulkamania alive in spirit. The man might have been gone, but the legend was proving to be immortal. In the weeks after the tributes and the WWE Memorial broadcast, the Bolia household in Clearwater slowly began to settle into a new kind of rhythm, one without Hulk Hogan physically present, but with his memory woven into every corner of the home. The red and yellow glow of his memorabilia seemed warmer now, not as sharp a reminder of loss, but as a constant reassurance that he was still with them in spirit. Every evening, Brooke would light a single candle beside the championship belt displayed in the living room. She said it made her feel like she was keeping the arena lights on for him, even now. Nick, meanwhile, found comfort in the smallest routines his father had loved. He took over Hogan's morning beach walks, often wearing one of his old bandanas and listening to the same classic rock playlists his father swore by. Locals began to recognize the habit and would wave from a distance or stop to share their own Hogan stories. Some told Nick about meeting his dad during autograph signings in the 80s, others about seeing him at the local diner buying breakfast for an entire table of fans. Nick kept a small notebook with him on these walks, jotting down each story. One day, he told Brooke, "We'll put these all in a book. Every single one. So no one ever forgets." Behind closed doors, there were still hard days. Brooke admitted to friends that she often reached for her phone to call her father after reading something exciting or needing advice. "Then I remember he's not on the other end anymore," she said quietly. But when those moments came, she turned to the vault of voicemails she'd saved over the years, Hogan's booming, "Hey, brother." Greetings, his gentle reminders to keep your head up, his random jokes about wrestling or life. She'd listen to one or two, let the tears come, and then find herself smiling. The WWE made it clear that Hogan's legacy would not be confined to a single tribute show. Plans were underway for an annual Hulk Hogan Legacy Night that would rotate between Raw and SmackDown each year, with proceeds from merchandise sales going to children's charities, echoing the work Hogan himself had done quietly for decades. Triple H personally called Brooke to discuss the concept. "Your dad gave everything to this business," he told her. "It's our responsibility to make sure the next generation knows exactly who he was, and not just in the ring." Brooke agreed immediately, offering to help select footage and share personal stories that showed her father's softer side. In Clearwater, the renaming of the beach to Hogan's Beachfront became a civic event bigger than anyone anticipated. On the day of the dedication, thousands gathered along the shoreline, many wearing Hulkamania shirts or feather boas despite the heat. The city unveiled a bronze plaque at the start of the boardwalk, engraved with Hogan's likeness and one of his most famous quotes: "Train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins, and you will never go wrong, brother." Brooke and Nick stood together as the plaque was revealed, both placing their hands on it as the crowd erupted into applause. For a brief moment, it felt as though Hogan himself might come jogging down the sand, flashing that trademark grin. In the wrestling world, his absence continued to be felt backstage. At house shows and televised events, wrestlers swapped road stories about Hogan in locker rooms, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with choked voices. Younger talent who had never shared a ring with him began studying old matches more closely, not just to see his moves, but to understand how he connected with audiences on a level few had achieved. "It wasn't about the leg drop," Sami Zayn remarked during an interview. "It was about how he made you feel when you walked out of that arena. You felt bigger, stronger, like you could take on the world. That's what I want to bring to my own matches now." One of the most touching moments came at a non-televised WWE live event in Tampa. Toward the end of the night, the lights dimmed, and Real American hit the speakers. The crowd of several thousand roared to their feet, expecting a tribute video. Instead, a spotlight shone on an empty ring, where one of Hogan's signature feather boas lay. Independent wrestling promotions began holding their own small tributes. No one needed to. Some named tournaments filled the arena with others used his likeness on charity posters until the music played out. One Florida high school wrestling team adopted the red and yellow color scheme for their uniforms this season, telling reporters, "If Hulk Hogan could inspire millions, maybe we can inspire just a few more in our own way." At home, the Bolia family started a foundation in Hogan's name, focused on two causes close to his heart: supporting children's hospitals and helping retired wrestlers with medical expenses. The announcement of the foundation was made in a small press conference, where Brooke addressed the crowd. "Dad believed in lifting people up, whether you were a fan, a friend, or even a stranger. This foundation is our way of making sure that part of him never stops working." She paused, visibly emotional, before adding, "And we're going to run it with the same energy he had. All gas, no brakes." The months ahead were already filling with events in his honor: a traveling exhibit of his gear, a documentary in production with the cooperation of his family, and a special Hall of Fame segment planned for WrestleMania season that would see his induction video played one last time to a sold-out stadium. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Clearwater, Brooke and Nick sat together on the porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the waves roll in. The bandanas, boas, and championship belts inside the house were reminders of the public icon. But here, in the quiet, they remembered the man who grilled burgers in the backyard, told the same corny jokes over and over, and called them every time he landed in a new city just to say he loved them. "I used to think Hulk Hogan was indestructible," Nick said after a long pause. Brooke nodded. "He was, in a way. Because look around, he's still here. Every person who wears his colors, every chant, every story, that's him. And it always will be." In that moment, the grief seemed to shift. It was no longer the heavy weight of loss, but the steady flame of remembrance. Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, had said his final goodbye, but the world he left behind was brighter for having known him. And as long as someone, somewhere, ripped open a shirt and shouted "brother" at the top of their lungs, Hulkamania would live on forever. It was WrestleMania night. The grandest stage of them all, bathed in blinding lights and the electric hum of 80,000 voices packed into a sold-out stadium. But this year, before the pyrotechnics, before the matches that had been hyped for months, there was something different in the air, a sense of anticipation not for a contest, but for a shared moment of remembrance. The WWE Universe knew it was coming. In the weeks leading up to the event, WWE had promised the ultimate celebration of Hulkamania. One final, definitive tribute to Hulk Hogan that would unite fans, wrestlers, and legends under the same roof one last time. People arrived wearing vintage Hulkamania shirts, some so faded they looked older than the fans themselves. Red and yellow boas fluttered in the breeze, replica championship belts gleamed under the stadium lights, and a sea of bandanas stretched as far as the eye could see. As the night began, the giant LED screens surrounding the ring faded to black. The usual opening fireworks never came. Instead, the low, deep toll of a bell echoed once, twice, 10 times. The sound rolled over the stadium like a wave, each strike carrying the weight of decades. The crowd, usually roaring at this stage, stood in near total silence. Then, without warning, the unmistakable guitar riff of Real American hit the speakers. It wasn't the stripped-down, somber version from the memorial. This was the full, booming original, and the stadium erupted. Fans leapt to their feet, some crying, some shouting the lyrics at the top of their lungs. On the screens, a montage began not just of Hulk Hogan the performer, but of Hogan the man. We saw him slamming Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, holding the WWE Championship high above his head as flashbulbs exploded like stars around him. We saw Hollywood Hogan strutting into the NWO, sneering at the crowd with that black beard and those shades. We saw him returning to WWE in 2002, soaking in the deafening cheers from a new generation of fans. And in between, we saw the moments the public had rarely witnessed: Hogan visiting children in hospitals, laughing with ring crew during set changes, hugging his family after shows. When the video ended, the lights rose slowly to reveal the ring. In the center stood a life-size bronze statue of Hulk Hogan, muscles flexed, shirt mid-rip, frozen forever in the pose that had defined his legend. Draped over its shoulders was one of his real feather boas, preserved from his last public appearance. At the base sat a custom WWE Championship belt engraved with the words, "Immortal." Then came the voices. One by one, WWE legends walked down the ramp, each to their own entrance music, each wearing red and yellow in some way. Ric Flair, tears already streaming, put his hand on the statue's shoulder. Stone Cold Steve Austin gave a nod and raised a beer can toward the sky. The Undertaker placed a single black rose at the foot of the statue and stepped back, head bowed. Finally, Brooke Hogan's music hit, not a wrestling theme, but a simple instrumental. She walked slowly to the ring, wearing her father's original WrestleMania eye jacket. When she took the microphone, the stadium fell silent again. "My dad loved this business," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "He loved the fans, the energy, the noise, but more than anything, he loved the people. The ones in this ring, the ones in the back, and every single one of you out there tonight. You were his family, too. And tonight, we're not saying goodbye. We're saying, keep it alive." She pointed toward the stands, and in unison, the crowd began chanting, "Hogan! Hogan! Hogan!" The chant grew louder, vibrating through the metal beams of the stadium, rolling like thunder across the open night sky. It was as if the entire WWE Universe was summoning him back for just one more pose. And then, in the most fitting finale imaginable, the giant screens lit up with archive footage of Hogan himself. The video showed him in a packed arena, cupping his ear to each side of the crowd, then pointing straight at the camera. His voice boomed over the stadium speakers. "What ya gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you?" The crowd erupted into a roar that could have shaken the foundations of the city. Pyrotechnics exploded high above the stadium in red and yellow. Real American played once more, and thousands of fans ripped open their shirts in tribute, waving them in the air just as Hogan had done for decades. As the music swelled, the camera panned across the faces of legends, current superstars, and fans of all ages, all united in a single, joyous, defiant truth. Hulk Hogan was gone, but Hulkamania would never die. And when the lights finally dimmed and the tribute came to an end, the crowd didn't file out in silence. They kept chanting his name long after the show moved on, their voices carrying out into the streets, into the night, into history. Because in the end, that's what Hulk Hogan had given them, not just moments, not just matches, but a piece of himself. And that piece would live forever. Under the gray skies of a quiet Florida morning, the air around Clearwater was heavy with more than humidity, it was heavy with grief. The streets leading to the memorial grounds were lined with fans, some in vintage Hulkamania shirts faded by decades of devotion, others clutching handmade signs with messages that could break the hardest of hearts. "We love you, Hulk. Forever our champ. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, we'll miss you." From the moment the gates opened, the atmosphere was not just that of a funeral, but of a final, unspoken promise to send off one of wrestling's greatest icons with the love, respect, and spectacle he had earned over half a century. It had been only days since the shocking announcement of Hulk Hogan's passing, and the wrestling world had not stopped reeling. His death had been sudden, yet somehow it felt like the end of an era fans had always feared was coming. In every corner of the memorial ground, people were whispering memories, recounting the first time they saw him step into the ring, or how his larger-than-life charisma made them believe in heroes, even if only for the length of a match. There was no distinction between celebrities, old friends, and everyday fans today. Here, everyone was united by the same loss. At the center of the memorial stood a simple yet powerful stage, draped in red and yellow, Hogan's signature colors, with a single spotlight illuminating the framed photograph of him in his prime. The image, carefully chosen by his family, captured him in mid-pose, muscles flexed, a grin spreading under his trademark handlebar mustache, and that unmistakable fire in his eyes. To the side rested a custom WWE Championship belt, one of the replicas gifted to him during his Hall of Fame induction, polished until it gleamed beneath the somber light. Beneath it, an arrangement of white lilies and roses lay intertwined with yellow chrysanthemums, his daughter Brooke's choice, a floral tribute to the joy and strength her father carried through his life. By the time the service began, the crowd had grown into the thousands. The first notable arrival drew a hush over the audience, Vince McMahon, moving slowly but steadily, flanked by close aides. For decades, McMahon and Hogan had been synonymous with each other's success, their partnership creating the wrestling boom of the 1980s. Dressed in a dark tailored suit, McMahon kept his gaze forward, the stoic facade of a businessman masking the heavy grief in his eyes. He paused briefly at the stage, bowed his head, and placed his hand gently on the championship belt, a silent farewell from promoter to performer. Following close behind were WWE legends, each greeted by waves of applause and soft cheers from the crowd. Stone Cold Steve Austin arrived in a black suit and cowboy boots, his trademark intensity softened by a rare vulnerability. He exchanged a brief embrace with The Undertaker, who appeared moments later wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his stoic expression as unreadable as ever, though the slight tremor in his jaw betrayed the emotion beneath. Ric Flair, in a sharp blue suit, clutched a folded handkerchief, wiping his eyes repeatedly as fans called out his name in sympathy. "Whoa," one voice cried from the crowd, and Flair smiled faintly, acknowledging it with a small wave before joining the gathering near the front. The air shifted when Brooke Hogan entered, escorted by her brother Nick. Brooke's composure was remarkable, but her eyes told a different story, red-rimmed, swollen from days of silent tears. She wore a simple black dress, a locket hanging around her neck that held a small piece of her father's bandana. Nick, dressed in a dark suit, walked stiffly beside her, his face pale, jaw clenched. They made their way to the front row, where a section was reserved for family and the closest of friends. As Brooke settled into her seat, She glanced at the photograph on stage and exhaled deeply, as if trying to gather strength from her father's image. When the service officially began, the officiant, a longtime friend of Hogan's, welcomed the attendees with a voice both warm and trembling. He spoke of Hogan not just as a wrestler, but as a man who had changed lives with kindness, loyalty, and an unwavering sense of gratitude. He was more than the red and yellow. He was more than the 24-inch pythons or the leg drop. He was a father, a mentor, a friend who never forgot your name and never turned down a handshake. The first tribute came from Ric Flair, gripping the podium for stability. His voice, usually booming, was softer now. We've all lost colleagues, but losing Terry, losing Hulk. This is different. He spoke of their first match together, the nights on the road, the private jokes no one else understood. We fought, we argued, but every time I saw him, he'd flash that grin and say, "Brother, we're still standing." And now he's gone, but in a way, he's still standing, in every single one of us who was lucky enough to know him. The Undertaker's tribute was brief but heavy. Hulk Hogan wasn't just an icon, he was a foundation. Without him, this business would not be what it is today. And without him, I wouldn't be who I am. Rest easy, brother. We'll take it from here. Cena followed, telling the crowd that Hogan was the reason he believed in superheroes, and when he met him, he realized he was one. Triple H added stories of Hogan's backstage generosity, how he made the locker room feel like a family. When Brooke finally took the microphone, the stadium rose. "My dad wasn't perfect," she began, "but he was mine. And no matter what happened in his career or life, he never stopped being my hero. He taught me that strength isn't just about muscles, it's about heart. And he had the biggest one I've ever known." Her voice cracked, recalling nights when he'd return from long tours, but still find time to read bedtime stories. The crowd clapped through their tears, some chanting his name. A lone acoustic guitar played Real American as a montage appeared on the screen. Victories, betrayals, Hall of Fame moments, but also him laughing in the kitchen, hugging his kids, playing with his dogs. It ended with Hogan smiling at the camera, holding up a peace sign. "Thank you, Hulk. We'll never forget you." After the public service, a private farewell took place backstage. Brooke held one of his feather boas to her chest, whispering, "This still smells like him." Nash told a story about Hogan turning a diner into a chanting crowd of strangers. Booker T shared how Hogan called him during his hardest days, just to talk for hours. The Undertaker removed his hat and placed it by the boas. "Rest in peace, my friend," he said, and the room exhaled. The week after was a blur. WWE headquarters hung black banners edged in red and yellow. Triple H planned an entire Raw tribute show. Brooke and Nick stayed out of the public eye, keeping vigil at home, sorting memorabilia, replaying old voicemails. Wrestlers filled social media with memories: The Rock, Austin, Becky Lynch, all crediting Hogan with shaping their careers. Worldwide tributes poured in: a mural in London, a charity lucha event in Mexico City, a 10-bell salute in Tokyo. Clearwater renamed his jogging route Hogan's Beachfront, unveiling a bronze plaque engraved with his likeness and motto: "Train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and you will never go wrong, brother." When Raw aired the tribute, the entire roster stood on stage in Hulkamania Forever shirts. A 15-minute video played, showing every chapter of his life. The Undertaker left a boa and title belt in the center of the ring. In Clearwater, the family watched in silence. The next morning, WWE sent them bundles of letters from fans, stories of how Hogan inspired them, changed them, gave them hope. Then came WrestleMania night. The lights dimmed, the bell tolled 10 times, and Real American roared through the stadium. On screen, a career-spanning montage played, ending with the words, "Immortal." In the ring stood a bronze statue of Hogan mid-shirt rip, draped in his real boa. Legends filed in: Flair, Austin, Undertaker, each laying something at its base. Brooke entered last, wearing his WrestleMania eye jacket. "My dad loved this business," she told the crowd. "Loved the noise, loved the people. Tonight we're not saying goodbye. We're saying, keep it alive." The The crowd erupted in chants of Hogan. Hogan. Archive footage appeared of him cupping his ear and pointing to the camera. What you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you? Fireworks exploded in red and yellow, and thousands ripped open their shirts in unison. The roar could have been heard for miles. Hogan was gone, but in that moment, and in every chant, every story, every memory, Hulkamania was still running wild. And it always would. Alright, here's the production-ready faceless YouTube documentary script version of the full Hulk Hogan memorial narrative. I've kept it exactly in your cinematic, emotionally charged exposé style, with pacing and transitions designed for maximum viewer retention. This is written so it can be read word for word in a voiceover, while paired with B-roll, photos, and video clips. Under the gray skies of a quiet Florida morning, the air around Clearwater was heavy with more than humidity, it was heavy with grief. The streets leading to the memorial grounds were lined with fans, some in vintage Hulkamania shirts faded by decades of devotion. Others clutching handmade signs with messages that could break the hardest of hearts. We love you, Hulk. Forever our champ. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, we'll miss you. From the moment the gates opened, the atmosphere was not just that of a funeral, but of a final, unspoken promise to send off one of wrestling's greatest icons with the love, respect, and spectacle he had earned over half a century. It had been only days since the shocking announcement of Hulk Hogan's passing, and the wrestling world had not stopped reeling. In every corner of the memorial ground, people whispered memories, recalling the first time they saw him step into the ring, or how his larger-than-life charisma made them believe in heroes. At the center stood a simple yet powerful stage, draped in red and yellow, Hogan's signature colors. A single spotlight illuminated a framed photograph of him in his prime, muscles flexed, that famous grin under his handlebar mustache, and a fire in his eyes that never seemed to dim. To the side, a gleaming WWE Championship belt. One of the replicas gifted during his Hall of Fame induction. Beneath it, white lilies, roses, and yellow chrysanthemums. Brooke Hogan's personal tribute to her father. The first notable arrival drew a hush over the crowd. Vince McMahon, moving slowly but steadily, flanked by close aides. For decades, McMahon and Hogan had been synonymous with each other's success. Dressed in a dark tailored suit, he paused at the stage, bowed his head, and placed his hand gently on the championship belt. A silent farewell, from promoter to performer. Then came the legends. Stone Cold Steve Austin. The Undertaker. Ric Flair, handkerchief in hand, wiping tears. Each arrival greeted by quiet applause and calls of love from the fans. The air shifted when Brooke Hogan entered, escorted by her brother Nick. Her eyes, red-rimmed from days of silent tears. Nick, pale and stiff-jawed. They made their way to the front row, where a section was reserved for family and the closest of friends. One by one, tributes began. Ric Flair, voice trembling, recalling road stories and private jokes. The Undertaker, solemn and slow, calling Hogan a foundation of the business. John Cena, admitting Hogan was his first superhero and remained one. Triple H, remembering the way Hogan always made the locker room feel like a family. Then Brooke. My dad wasn't perfect, but he was mine, she began. He taught me that strength isn't just